Hi, good evening, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you doing?
Okay. I'm so hopeless at all these buttons, so I have somebody advising me on the other line. Sunil is helping me because he's going to be recording something.
It's fine. You're very clear.
Okay. Then I'll put this up. Can you hear me now directly?
Yes, very
Okay.
clear.
Okay, Sunil. I think I'm okay. Now, how have you been?
I'm fine, sir. Thank you very much. I had a class today in the morning and then, yeah. Is it very cold in Delhi?
Very cold.
Okay.
And today is a particularly miserable day. No sun, no nothing.
Oh my God.
So one of those not very nice days. But it is Lodi,
Yes.
which is the birth of spring for
Yes.
us, but no sign of spring yet.
Happy Lodi to you, sir.
Thank you. And tell me, where are your colleagues from that time, Bakshi and Chatterjee? Where are they both now?
So one of them, I think, is working in a law firm. The other one is in Germany.
Achha.
Yes.
Oh, one is older. And in Germany, teaching or working?
Yes, so I think he's doing his PhD there. Yes.
And then, there was a point in time I was looking through my earlier mails.
Right.
And the three of you would ask for a certificate. Did I ever give it? It was in 2009 that you asked.
Yes. And I think you replied on that email very recently. So I recall that, yes, we had got, we had sent you an email asking for a certificate.
But you wanted to use that certificate for pursuing a PhD program or something like that. But so I just wondered as I was going through these earlier mails that did I or didn't I? But it's now not very relevant now. But nonetheless, we have to take I feel that with your help, we must take this transgender issue further until we are able to convince not only all authorities in India, but authorities in the region, and continue work again towards making it a global issue. So I thought I'd ask one of the newspapers in Delhi, Express or Hindu, or perhaps the Hindu, to enable me to do a piece and share the history of where we began and where we might now have reached. And for these forthcoming elections, how many may have registered under transgender? Right.
So Sushmita is there with us. She's joined us.
Hi, Sushmita.
So
good to see you.
Yes.
After all that exchange of mails, we finally made it on the screen at least.
Yeah, I wish we could do this in person, but...
Yeah, but I was in Bangalore then on the 5th because I had arranged one or two other things. And so I went ahead very briefly.
Yeah.
But still feel that it wasn't, but mine was a closed door meeting somewhere. So it was still better not to be exposed.
Right. But anyways, in our university shut down on the 5th itself, I believe, and the initial date that we had planned.
Yeah.
So, we just...
But we'll wait for another time as well. And I was thinking, Sushmita, that maybe after this session, we could, perhaps a month or two later, if times and schedules and things permit, we could do a kind of follow-up.
Right.
I think we'll begin in a minute.
Yeah, sure. Let other people join in. I was only a little nervous because I never know what buttons to press. I can't tell you how illiterate I am. So I have Sunil and all that, then they'll record as well. And so I'm going to try not to touch anything because pata nahi kya hoga. But the weather was so nice in Bangalore for the day I was there, the 4th and the 5th. And now with Omicron spreading quite so rapidly as it is, I don't know, one is just afraid to travel again. Once again. I'll just come back in a moment with a glass of hot water. I'll just be back. Thank you.
I think we can begin, Prerna.
Right. Okay. A very good evening to everyone present here today. I welcome you all to the National Law School Public Lecture Series. In 2008, three law students who were in their very first year of law school at KIIT University, Bhubaneswar, mustered a little bit of confidence to ask a direct question to the then Chief Election Commissioner. Sir, why don't the transgender citizens of India not have voter ID cards? In a sense, why don't they have voting rights? As one of the law students, one of the three law students, I was surprised then, and I'm really impressed today, how the Chief Election Commissioner swiftly took up the issue as a priority and translated the burning demand for transgender persons' voting rights in India into a reality. I'm speaking about this very nice person, Shri Navin Chawla, from whom I've learned three very, very important things. First is that in practice, how can elections and the voting system in India be more inclusive? The second is that how public figures, leaders can become more empathetic, more responsive, and deeply connected to the citizens' demands, their needs, their circumstances. And the third is that the idea of social justice and how it's more important, it's above law and politics. We are very happy to host you, sir, today as a speaker. Shri Navin Chawla read history at St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, and SOAS London. He was a visiting fellow at Oxford. He joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1969, and he retired as secretary to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. In 2009, as the Chief Election Commissioner, he conducted the general elections to national and international acclaim. Recently, he has authored a book titled Every Vote Counts, The Story of India's Elections, that was published by HarperCollins India. With this, I request you, sir, to please deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping this biodata as brief as possible. It just takes up time. First, I must thank the Vice Chancellor for inviting me, to Dr. Sushmita Pati, Assistant Professor, for following this through, and Prerna being that inspirational light. The other two are missing, the three questionnaires. But I was so happy with that question that I do remember the audience very vividly that day. So I'm grateful that to have been chosen and invited to deliver this prestigious series of University Law Series. And I hope I get a chance when Omicron and others, these things, begin to lift, that we might be able to have a session in the hall in Bangalore and be able to intermix with the students. But as I had told Dr. Pati, that I won't speak for very long, maybe 20 or 25 minutes to introduce. It's such a big subject, elections in India. We're always churning with something or the other going on, elections being held periodically. So we're always in a state of some flux. And hopefully, we're still a young country, there are many dynamics at play, many positive and some negative too. And I intend to cover a little of both. Now, every vote counts emanates from the fact that during the freedom struggle, what the freedom fighters had determined from as early as 1928 at the All India Party's conference that was held in Allahabad, I think, was that there should be, in spite of very high levels of illiteracy, there must be an equal franchise, universal franchise. And there were murmurs at that time that female illiteracy was particularly high. And but these freedom fighters were determined that we should not go on the path of other countries where women had to struggle so hard in order to get the vote, and that the vote and the process would mature over time. So this was also renewed, the same faith when the constitution makers sat down to promulgate the constitution. And so the right to vote, which your generation accepts as given, was something that is very precious. And many countries and many women have struggled. People of color in the US have struggled till pretty recently to be able to get the vote. So it's a very precious vote. And I think there was great wisdom in the Constituent Assembly that both universal adult franchise, in the face of great skepticism at that time. For example, the departing Raj felt that the whole thing would collapse, like a pack of cards, because nobody was literate practically. There was only 16% literacy at the time. But it didn't happen that way. And one of the reasons that it didn't happen, or some of the reasons were the vision of the Constituent Assembly, the freedom fighters, the fact that we had Jawaharlal Nehru as the first prime minister, who during 17 years of his prime ministership did not interfere in the growth of institutions, and that he chose, on the advice, I think, of the then Chief Minister of West Bengal, an unknown and unlikely hero called Sukumar Sen, who had the very daunting task of setting up the first election process. By the time we came to head the election commission, you know, the structure was there, bricks had been laid, there was a foundation, and there was a huge building atop the foundation. But for that man, he had to build up a voting list from nowhere. And he had no machinery, and there was no civil service to speak of. So I tried to research his life, which I put in the book, so I won't repeat here. Because he left no memoir, no book. So any of these early commissioners, chief election commissioners at that time, left no memoirs, no books. And if any of our students who are listening on can possibly, during the course of studies or accidentally even, research the lives of these early election commissioners, because we all got to know about Session. But pre-Session era was one nobody knew about and nobody written about. And I think we need to begin to reconstruct that. And in the case of even Sukumar Sen, I had to go to his daughters, you know, one living in Calcutta, one in London, and try to reconstruct what I could. Having said that, I must mention one factor about Sukumar Sen, which those who haven't read the book wouldn't know, and that was that when he started making the electoral roll, as many as 3 million women didn't give their names. They were all Munnu's wife, or, you know, Papu's mother, or so-and-so's sister, but they had no names to give. And he said, if you don't give me names, they're not coming onto the electoral roll. Now, the interesting thing was that by the time he did the second election, 5 years later, those 3 million had all given their names. Whether they'd chosen to, or whether political parties had become more active, whether candidates found them, whether they realized the vote is valuable, but he didn't have to disenfranchise any woman, any lady, by the time we came to the second election of India. So this is a little about why every vote continues to be important, crucial, and particularly in your law school, when, you know, people say, what's the use? There are so many negatives to the election. Yes, there are negatives, but people like you are all leaders in the making. And in your own way, you are nothing less than pioneers and leaders. And you have to carry on the crusade to make sure that, that people have their cards, of course, but vote in a very aware and measured manner. So this was the early part of this. You might find it interesting that while our constitution came into being on the 26th of January 1950, the election commission was set up one day before, on the 25th. So now we celebrate that as National Electors' Day, National Voting Day. And all the new voters who turned 18 that year, we gather them from here and there. And they too are spirits that are flying the flag soon after they turn 18. The important thing that I would like to mention in the face of all the criticism that might arise just now is that if we look at our region and we look at all the countries that got independence at about the same time from colonial rule, and especially in our region, as we look around, I'm not naming any country, but so many went towards military dictatorships. Others became dictators forever. Those who were monarchical remained even more monarchical than before, with the sole exception of Bhutan, where with the wisdom of the fourth king and the present king, the fourth king especially moved Bhutan away from complete dictatorship to a democracy, and a functioning democracy, because they've had 3 elections since everything was set up there. And with each general election, they've changed their leadership, which is a very happy development. But when I see many other countries in Africa and all that became dictators and or became martial law administrators, it made me think that India is still a shining beacon in that part of the Commonwealth that is still celebrated in some form or the other. So that's one. The second thing I'd like to say is that we've always had our elections on time each time. There hasn't been a delay. We've declared the results on the time, on the day we said that we declare the results. Of course, things are much easier with the EVM because we are able to get the results by the end of the day. But we still have the elections on time. There are many countries that either don't have elections or don't have it on time or have it on the whim of whoever is ruling that country. The third important thing is that the results are accepted by winners and losers alike. So that says a great deal for the fact that our structure is still sound. There are many countries where I've been to as observer where I have found that the result has simply not been accepted. In some South American countries, people have just sat on the main squares of the capital city and blocked the roads for months at a time. In other countries, I have heard, I've listened to also, when I've been an observer and the result hasn't been accepted, people stand on the balconies and hit at their utensils and protest at a particular agreed time of the evening. So we see that also happening. So number one, everyone has the right to vote. We have universal adult franchise. We are seeing that our lists of photo epic cards, the identity cards, are almost complete, barring a few places like Bangalore and the peripatetic cities where nobody seems to hang on to a particular address for very long and changes 2 or 3 addresses. But from 508 million election cards in the 2009 election that I did to almost 97 or 98% cards given to voters, epic cards with the photograph on the card, photograph on the roll to prevent, this sort of cheating and so on. So we have the right to vote. We do elections on time, and then that result, so far, thankfully, has been accepted by the loser equally as with the winner. So these are 3 big points. What do I think is going wrong? The constitution makers were worried that we would be overtaken by problems of caste, of religion, of region, these sort of vociferous tendencies. And they had provisions in the constitution, in the preamble to the constitution, we have reference, and then of course, the Representation of the People Act 5051 has clauses, we have Supreme Court judgments, and we have the Model Code of Conduct. But that fortunately is a unique piece, non-legislative, non-statutory, evolved first in Kerala, then gradually given shape in the country, strengthened by the Election Commission, and strengthened by some of the verdicts in various courts. With all this, instead, what I am beginning to find now is that yes, the candidates are still chosen on the basis quite often or most often of religion and caste and region and this sort of thing. But the political parties of the day, except those that have the communist parties, frankly, let me name them, who still have strong cadres in some parts of India. For the rest, the mantra has unfortunately become winnability. And so who can win is given the ticket, and who can win is supported by the party machine. In some sad cases, who can win also has to pay some money in advance to the political party to even get the candidature. And then having got the candidature, is expected to fund his own or her own election, barring a token amount or some amount that the political party gives. So we've been overtaken by money power. And the second thing that we are sadly overtaken by is muscle power, criminality. So we have statutory limits. They've just been raised for these elections. You can go spend this much and no more. But we know that that's simply not the reality. I'm beginning to find that 2 or 3 years ago, even in university elections, people were beginning to spend what was allowed for an assembly election, in spite of my predecessor, Mr. Lindo's various guidelines. So there is no ceiling on expenditure in actual fact. And only the wealthiest are able to get tickets, as I said, apart from where there are strong cadres. And unfortunately, some studies out of Yale University and elsewhere have pointed out that if there are criminal antecedents to back up the money power, that candidate is even more successful of winning. And I wondered why it was that people would want to vote for a criminal. But I must share this with you in particular, with your students, is that since they feel, in the rural hinterland, even in cities, when we go into a court of law, first we have to pay all you incipient lawyers a lot of money, which you can't afford. You've almost become the wealthiest segment in this country, barring a few industrialists. Secondly, the criminal justice system in our rural hinterland barely exists. So therefore, they turn to that deliverer of justice who uses muscle power to be able to deliver justice on the doorstep, as it were. Because I often wondered, why was it that the Supreme Court says we are trying to promote that so-and-so has, the Supreme Court in 2002, 2003, as you know, in those very well reflected judgments, said that the voter must be made aware of the antecedents of a potential candidate. That is, that their wealth, their education, as well as their criminal antecedents. And most recently, the Supreme Court has directed the Election Commission that has to be, every political party has to put that in the newspapers, give wide publicity to it 3 times before the election. But as we watch the candidatures, and we are all watching, all of us, we will also reflect and see whether the level of criminality has gone down. Today, as we speak, in our parliament and our existing legislatures, 30% almost have criminal antecedents, of whom 15 to 16% are there for heinous crimes that are dragging on in courts. Murder, attempt to murder, rape. After the Nirbhaya case, people are still putting candidates forward who, in their self-sworn affidavits, mention rape as one of the crimes that they are, for which FIRs have been lodged. But our justice system is very slow, and it's slowed down. And there really should be an appeal to all the legal fraternity in the country that they should not be in a position to afford the best lawyers. Why should they be in a position to afford the best lawyers? In order to be able to protect the cases that relate to heinous crimes? I can understand the case of a check bouncing, for example, but I can't understand several attempts to murder and dacoity and rape. And those are dragging on in the courts because they have wealthy lawyers. So that's a real no-no, isn't it? So these are some of the things that I think are not going wrong, right? Paid news has become another frightening, because there was a time when where people were having to approach candidates, but now candidates and those people who are in the media enter into a contract together. So much for publicity for you, this package for publicity against your opponent as well, this sort of thing. Then on the social media, very difficult, awfully difficult to regulate hate and this sort of thing. That's why that judgment, which is pending before the Supreme Court, not the judgment, but the plea that is pending before the Supreme Court, is so very important on the anvil of these elections that are coming up. So these are some of the issues that I wanted to raise, the pros and the cons. And as it's now 6:25, I think, would you agree that this is a good time to throw it open?
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. Now we can take up questions from the audience. Please keep your questions very, very short so that we can have more people ask questions. Yes. Who would like to go first? We'll have Deepak, then Parth. Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Chawla. Thank you so much for that very insightful lecture. My question is with reference to Article 326 and Section 62(5) of the Representation of People Act, which disenfranchises prisoners from voting. And of course, subsequent Supreme Court interpretations of that section have reduced the right to, or rather have interpreted the right to vote as being a merely statutory right, one which Parliament can give and take. I was wondering if you could give us some insight into what your stance on that is.
It's a very passionate one. And seeing all the law books behind you, I might need your help. Now, I'll tell you why. When I was a Chief Election Commissioner, no, even a little earlier, when I was Election Commissioner, this dichotomy always struck me as strange. A man who's convicted can stand from jail, not vote, and win. And an under trial has no voice. I mean, he or she are faceless. So the plight of the under trial was something that affected me greatly. And as soon as I became Chief Election Commissioner, and I took it up with my colleagues, for some reasons that they can't remember even when I ask them now, they gave some reasons why we should not attempt to give the under trial a vote. But we must. And I think there is a petition pending. I think pending for far too long. And we must ensure that not only the prisoner, to a prisoner in a jail, the model code of conduct is in any case immaterial, it's not going to apply. And so that prisoner must get the right, and the under trial, we must do everything possible proactively in order to be ensured that the under trial is given the right. And there was another reason why I wanted this, and that was that I felt that this was a huge community in our country from whom not just the voting right had been snatched, but the right of identity had been snatched. There was no lawyer to represent that person, so they languished for months and years. I remember long years ago, Chief Justice Bhagwati had tried to be able to empower more people to come, the sort of legal forums to come up for people who were completely disenfranchised. And this is a community. So I'm so glad that yours is the first question, a bit like the transgender that Prerna asked with the other two. But this is something we must actively work towards. And if you need my signature somewhere, in order particularly to be able to get the under trial to have the right to vote, then at least we begin in the Election Commission and in other fora to recognize the under trial as a human entity.
Right. We'll have Parth and then Devaditya.
Will Parth reply to that? I'm waiting for a response from him.
Parth,
good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. Good evening, sir. I'm Parth. I'm from Goa. I'm a resident of Goa. I just turned 18 in last year, July. And in a month, I'm going to be a first-time voter. So I'm going to be voting for the Goa State Legislative Assembly elections. So as a first-time voter, what would you suggest me to, what should I look at before going to cast my vote as a first-time voter?
You're so lucky to be a first-time voter at 18. By the time I was 21, I was away from the country and so on. So it took me a long time to get into the line. What I'd like you to do is not to be swayed, just to follow your own judgment, that you mustn't touch a person with criminal antecedents, whether convicted or not. But you must see that it's not for a traffic offense, if you know what I mean. And then that person So one is criminality, then you need to look at that person's education. I mean, between four people, whoever is really the person who can, and Goa is a place where you can reach out to your legislator very easily. You're not lost in some huge constituency in UP or something.
Yes, sir.
So it must be somebody who must represent your aspirations. And that person should know when they come around for your vote that I'm voting for you because you have no criminal antecedents. And, I hope that with your education, it must also not be somebody who has stashed away a lot of hidden wealth, which is therefore not in conformity with his or her declarations that have also to be made. I think that would be the ideal candidate. If you can find an ideal candidate with political parties nominating whom they are for the reasons I told you earlier. But it's a great opportunity.
So there are a few hands raised. Let's collect the questions. We'll have Devdatta's question first, then Anurag, and then Manhar. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, you mentioned the things that you see that you think are not right in the present election system, the criminal candidates with criminal antecedents being elected and all. My question to you is, where do you see the solution of this problem coming from? Do we just wait for an enlightened voter base that will choose not to elect such politicians, or do we think of devising some laws, or do you see some judicial intervention helping us solve this problem? Because firstly, it seems waiting for an enlightened voter base would just mean like doing nothing and hope that voters vote a certain way. And in case of even enacting a law, it would probably it seems unlikely that if a government is exploiting these problems, they will have some incentive to stop these problems. So where do you see the solution coming from?
We'll go to Anurag and then Manhar. Yeah, quickly.
Okay. Sir, my question is around Form 20 and technology in election. So you would definitely know about Form 20 and the opportunity that it can give to political parties and governments to target development work. And as you mentioned, winnability is the only criteria. I wanted to know your opinion about the totalizer machines that were in discussion after the EVM came into being. And is it really required? Is Form 20 actually providing an opportunity of discriminating in terms of governance for government and political parties also while like campaigning? So I would like to know of your opinion on EVM and totalizer machines.
Yes, Manhar.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Sir, so like Parth, I'll also be voting for the first time for the Punjab elections. And I had two questions. So like I get the emotional and the sentimental value when we say that every vote counts. But as a voter, as a young voter, when you see that, every politician is following the next one, and there's this kind of this disillusionment that you don't really have a meaningful choice to make. And that is why you don't really feel that your vote actually counts. So that is one. What do you do? What do you do? What is your answer to such a disillusioned voter? And second is that if I do wish to express that disillusionment by choosing to vote, let's say the nota option, if that is my real choice, that is not really effective, because even if in a hypothetical case the nota does get the highest amount in a constituency, the second candidate is still returned elected. So do you think there needs to be a change, that if the nota is voted to a certain extent, a re-election should be called?
So I'll try and answer all three. In the case of the first, it is very disillusioning, because for the last 25 years, I mean a quarter of a century, various chief election commissioners have been writing to various governments of the day to say that listing out the electoral reforms. Now with each CEC who comes, the pending reforms are added, and the next adds his and adds his and adds his, and now we have about 30 pending electoral reforms, none of which any government has paid much heed to. I think they just go into the shredder. So it's been very frustrating. It's a very frustrating ride in the election commission too, when you're trying to turn around to the government of the day and say that please, we have to change the system basically, because otherwise it's the same problems getting accentuated. And what the government of the day does is that they appoint a commission. So we've got some excellent commission reports on various shelves of the law ministry, none of which have been acted upon. And I will mention one. Long years ago, Mr. Indrajit Gupta, a parliamentarian from the CPI, whom I greatly respected, said that, government must finance the polls. Now it's all a bit outdated as we speak today, but there has to be, in my view, a way of government to be able to finance either the candidate on a pro rata basis, the party, but government finance must come in. Some government participation of that kind must come in. Otherwise, we're not able to break out of the cycle. You collect money, you put money into candidates, the moneyed candidate tends to win. And yet, even the most enlightened governments in the last 25 years, why have they not chosen to take that route? Why is it that all political parties at the end of the day, barring some amount of reform, close ranks against any advice or opinions offered by the Election Commission? Have you noticed that in Parliament, I mean, I say this with some frustration, that no parliamentarian actually criticizes one another. It becomes a very cozy club once you're in. Okay, so what is the way out? Whatever reform has come so far has come from the judicial process. Even in 2002 and 3, when the Supreme Court said that the candidates have to declare, these vital statistics, I don't know how much good it has done, because the third question just now was quite rightly, in many ways, that who do I vote for? What choices do I have? So these are. But can we just sit back and not fight against it? Should we not make our vote truly precious? Especially our thinking community, like you, who, as I feel, are all going to be losers. All leaders. But when the legal fraternity is the one that also supports in the courts what perhaps their conscience would not permit of. But you'll end up joining a law firm, and then you will go usually along the way the law firm flows. So you'll flow with it. So in that way, the politics also flows in a particular way. And if students like you don't, even a dozen of you, don't become the pioneers of a movement, and you have to think out measures. You have to see who's a supportive judge. There are so many things within the legal process, but to expect anything from the executive to act, so far I haven't seen much. But that doesn't mean that we give up hope. We fight as we fought for the transgender. My whole bureaucracy told me, no, it can't be done. I mean, it can be done, but it'll lead to this problem, that problem, names will get mixed up, etc., etc. We'll have to spend so much money on changing all the, the various forms that exist in all the languages in India, because we have to add one more column, which is O for other or T for transgender. So there's this, but we've got to overcome the difficulty. That's my view. And each of you has to therefore take that sort of positive stand. Otherwise, we're going to sort of be where we are. It's a huge fight. But we must fight it. As far as technology is concerned, the totalizer, I wanted to introduce the totalizer for the 2009 election, and who wouldn't agree? Parliament. Why didn't Parliament agree? I mean, it was only a question of 16 booths. Just 16 booths that were being lumped together at that time. Today, the totalizer can diffuse the election result, but we've had prominent, well-spoken, articulate leaders saying sotto voce that, okay, if you don't vote for me, I'm going to punish this village or I'm going to punish this booth. I can think of two ladies whom I won't name, highly educated and very articulate, who've been caught on camera. So, but it's something that we must continue to fight for. On the EVM, please read my chapter. I won't repeat too much. I do have faith that the EVM, and I've cast my views in stone. I feel that the EVM cannot be tampered with, not under the Indian conditions. And I'll go beyond the technical situation, quite apart from the fact that in 2009, after the general election, a whole lot of people said that this was being manipulated. And I laid out 100 machines and I said, manipulate them as if this were an election booth. And each of them wanted to take it home. And I said, if you take it home, you'll bring back a refrigerator. You know, I mean, I don't know what your people will tamper with and do, but we can't do it. But in our system, what I want to emphasize is that we don't have a situation like in some Latin American countries and all, where there are volunteers and so on. I'm not disparaging the volunteers, but here we have a state system. The district magistrate is the returning officer. And under the district magistrate is the machinery of government. Everybody gets a salary from either the central exchequer or the state exchequer. And on whom the conduct rules of the day apply. And the conduct rules can be a CBI inquiry, a sword hanging over your head for years to come. Now, if you're a district magistrate and there are 10,000 machines in your charge, locked up under your control, who will you allow to come in to tamper with those machines? Nobody. There are cameras everywhere. Political parties watch. The situation of the formal safeguarding is intact. And in this day and age, when you have a mobile phone and take a picture, who can ever break that part of the system? So I think that's fine. Subramanian Swamy is the one who asked about having something like the recording of the vote. And we proceeded. It took a few years, but the last general election was done satisfactorily with the vote being correctly recorded, because we're a noisy country. We're an argumentative country. If something goes wrong, hum bahut halla machate hain. You know, we don't hide our views from anywhere. So none of those complaints emanated in the last election. There were other complaints, but there weren't anything about there was the malfunctioning of the machine in some places. And those machines were replaced. There were engineers on hand. So nowhere was it a serious complaint. Otherwise, the result of that election wouldn't have been accepted. And again, as a first-time voter, I can only say there must be optimism. You must be optimistic. And we are not part of an illiterate population. We are part of a literate, highly educated. And if there are, between the three questions that you have asked and the earlier question, this is what I want for the university, is that if, I mean, I just don't want this to be one lecture of the distinguished lecture series. I mean, that was not my purpose in accepting Prerna, your request with alacrity. It was that we could form a thinking working group. And in that thinking working group, we could all work together. If you can spare the time, I've got oodles of time. And try and find some solution. Even as a result of this evening, we can find one solution for one problem or work towards it, oh, it's well worth it then. So we have to remain optimistic. We have to remain buoyant. We have to fight a system. No part of the world in which you happen to live, everywhere there'll be a system where something has to be fought. Everywhere. You can emigrate to Europe, you can emigrate to America, you can go to what is the developed part of the world, but there'll be something to fight, and we must fight it. It's the good fight.
Thank you, sir. Kunal has a question.
Thanks, Prerna. Thanks for the talk. And I hope you'll indulge me in asking you a question that's not completely related to your book or to your talk today, but you told us about the great triumph of the Election Commission of India. And I, as an Indian, share in that sense of triumph as well, after independence, to secure universal adult franchise and to do it continuously and in such a fair manner so far has probably been a great feat. But do you not think that in recent years, particularly with recent elections, there have been very serious questions that are being raised about the credibility of the institution itself, similar to questions about the RBI, another very famous and old institution of this country. And these are questions about fairness, about how elections were allowed during the second wave, the peak of the second wave of COVID, about favoring a particular political party or allowing certain mechanisms to be manipulated and turning a blind eye towards violations coming from the Bihar elections, the West Bengal elections, etc. So do you not think that, yes, to look at the past, we have had great successes, and I completely agree, but we cannot rest on the laurels of the past. The present day challenges, institutional challenges, are quite serious when one looks at the commission. I hope that as a former chief election commissioner, you'll share your views on this as well. Thank you.
We have Vandana. Yeah.
Good evening. So I think it's a follow-up question from the previous one. So my question to you is regarding what I think the poll strategist in the country, Mr. Prashant Kishore, said when he said that the election commission is completely hijacked and it's kind of serving the interests of a single political party in the country. And so I have specifically 3 questions following from what he said. So first of all, do you believe this to be true? Is the election commission actually biased? Second of all, how does the election commission deal with such allegations? I mean, as an institution, how does it handle its image? And thirdly, how does it steer clear from such allegations? So yeah, just these 3. Thank you.
Do I answer these 2 or do we wait for a third question? These 2?
Yeah, these 2.
Very difficult for me to answer. Sad for me to answer. I really don't know what to say. I'm not in a very good position to say it, having served in the institution. I don't have an answer. I read as you do. I watch as well. And I know that when I was asked questions again and again by Karan Thapar or Barkha at that time, before she was eased out of her job and Karan was eased out of his job, and others, I just invoked one mantra and one name, because I had to steer my answer very carefully for obvious reasons. And that was that I said that my mantra was that of denunciation, that I was never willing to compromise. And I did not deliberately engage with them. Both called me very diplomatic. But it was not just being diplomatic. It was having served in an institution. For example, if I have been an Air Force chief or a naval chief or an army chief, or somebody who's held very high constitutional office, I've been vice president of India or anything like that. It's part of the healthy convention of a country and of its institutions that its successors do not speak up. They remain silent. A few generals do write about this and that, but you will notice that it's never a chief of an institution. So we are still bound by a kind of convention that no matter what we feel, And no matter how deeply we feel it, and I'm as articulate as you are, and the rest of you are, but we have to not share it. In not sharing is also an answer. I know it sounds very unsatisfactory.
Right, sir. We understand. There are a few more questions. Adarsh Kumar Agrahari has one question. There are two in the chat box. I'll ask them. This is Shantanu asking, with the recent spin to the anti-defection provisions by taking resignation route, do you think the 52nd Amendment has run its course? And also, what are your views as a former chief election commissioner like MS Gill taking political plunge? That's his question. The other question is from Adarsh. Adarsh, would you like to ask the question yourself? And there's another one from Aditya. He asks, sir, should we vote for a good representative or a good political party?
Political plunge, no. Governor, no. And it hasn't happened. I've never opted for politics because what I see around me, it's not that I didn't have a political option 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Like all of you, I did. But it was not something that I ever wanted to exercise. And then if I had taken it after, say tomorrow, I mean, if I choose to join a political party, there's no age limit. But that's not the route. I think that would be a terrible blot on my own conscience if I were to adopt that. And even when the governorship was being thought about, because then Dr. MS Gill is my friend, but that's not a route I wanted to take. The other thing is between a good party and a good candidate. Well, if I have any necessities, I'd go to my candidate for something. And where I live in Delhi, for example, I've been fortunate in very good MLAs and good MPs, some of them, where we could actually go to with our problems, particularly the MLA, because it's so close at hand, you know. He and she, we had a brother-sister team. He was the MLA, she was the municipal councillor, and as a local person, you know, you look at your local issues, no? The bridge, the road, lighting, the local crime. So for that, I would go for a good candidate, irrespective of the party. But sometimes when a party that I favored at the poll put up a thoroughly bad candidate, you know, like I'm not in favor of film stars. So I just couldn't go in that direction and vote that person. And then parties also, you know, some parties come in very cleanly and I write about them. Then the second time round, they're disappointing because they come in with, you know, they brought use to a certain system. And then my personal choice is to look at the elector. And when I have not agreed with either party or elector, the electoral representative, I voted Nota. And I'll be very happy to see the day when Nota actually goes over the number of votes, because then we'll go to court and say we voted for Nota. And the court will then be able to help us with a decision that what Nota should be replaced with. It's an answer to a previous question. Because today, if Nota is going to be replaced by another election, then will it be different candidates? Will it be the same? If it leads to the same result, are we going to have election upon election upon election, the model code of conduct staying for months at an end, months at end? So it causes other problems. But a logical solution has to come out of Nota. And that is that we can't have 2 and 3 and 4 consequent elections with consecutive elections with money being spent. The courts must help us that if Nota overwhelms the candidature, then what? And there's another answer waiting to be answered, but sadly not by the executive, once again by the court.
So there's a question from Sudha. She asks, what is your opinion on proportionate electoral system? Isn't it the right time to move from first past to post to proportional election system? Yeah.
It's a very good question also. All your questions have been so brilliant. Yes, I think it is. You see, in the earlier years where illiteracy was high, and there were it was necessary for each person to make their vote felt. And what first post system led to was that even small groups were beginning to play a part in governance, in decision making. So even if it was, let us say, a very small group, that small group could also strive for power and get a slice of power. So to that extent, it was very good. But some countries in our neighborhood had tried to work a combination, a duality. And I think the time for that duality needs to come. And it's the third thing that your group, or our group, if I may say, needs to work out. The time has come for duality, not leaving of the one, but maybe another house or an upper house where there is representation, proportional representation. I think that balance is now needed.
There are two last questions. So one is Aditya is asking if he should vote for a good representative or a good political party.
Good representative.
Right.
Whom Aditya can go to, who can solve Aditya's local problems. But on the other hand, if he feels that that party is for some reason repugnant to him, then he has to make the difficult choice between a bad candidate and Nota.
So there's another interesting question. Adarsh is asking if we have virtual rallies instead of physical rallies may become a big problem for parties. What is the way forward, especially during the pandemic, for political parties, small, big?
I'm not in favor of rallies. We've seen what happened with Delta. We saw the cost in Delhi because everybody congregated to Delhi from the hinterland thinking that Delhi would have better medical facilities. And where were the medical facilities? People were dying like fleas. There was no bed, there was no oxygen, there was no ICU. For me, it was the most traumatic period after the stories of my partition, of my parents after partition. So if you're going to have rallies, then how? I've already spoken once on television that I don't think any political party or the election commission as an umpire can police those rallies. There will never be social distancing. There won't be masks. There won't be proper masks. And so it is inevitable going by what we saw just last year. And when did we see it? We saw it in March, April, and May, well within living memory. So are we now going to go down that route on the belief that this is something that is not quite so lethal? Won't it overwhelm all our hospital beds, all our doctors, swamp our healthcare? No, so I'm not in favor. And the election commission is to take a view by day after tomorrow, whether they're prolonging the order or not. But if they do permit rallies, and there's no need to. One is that the election commission can't police it. And instead, if we do something that, I'm sharing this with you almost the second time. You see, in Mexico, where I've been 5 times, what happens is that the entire media at that time, I'm not talking about social media now, which is proliferated everywhere. But at that time, the electronic and the print media was all really owned by Carlos Slim. What the election commission did at that time is that they also had a Doordarshan channel, but they commandeered all the channels and gave every political party a proportional slice, which they supervised. And they were open to receiving complaints from political parties कि मुझे कम दिया है, मुझे ज़्यादा देना चाहिए. And now the social media, when my book was released, the Chief Election Commissioner at the time, when asked, who was in the audience, when asked, well, how will you police the social media? He said, really by the IPC. And it's possible. If I were the Chief Election Commissioner, I'd call in the heads of the media houses and say, this is our model code of conduct. If the rest of the people on the field are following it, well, you can't thwart it. And if you thwart it, I have the powers during the election period to freeze you. Remember, courts don't interfere. And the election commissioner is omnipresent and is completely dominant, has the powers at that time to be able to take a decision that the country might go with. You can't flout that. There's a 3-person body. So all the Twitter and so on and so forth, all the heads can be called and say, we have a model code of conduct in our country. You need to observe that as well, just as the electronic and the print media are doing. And we also have the IPC. So you cannot bring in anything that causes hatred between communities, religions, and so on. So where you already have things on the statute book and any number of judgments from the apex court, these things are not at all difficult to manage by an election commission during election time. And so that's what I would do.
Right. We will take last 2 questions. Anamika, quickly.
Good evening, sir. There have been demands for simultaneous polls or what has been called one nation, one election. Do you think that is a good idea in theory? And especially as a former chief election commissioner, do you think it is possible to carry it out in practice? And how difficult would it be?
I think should I answer that? Oh, yeah, okay. I'll wait.
Yeah,
I'll answer it.
Yeah.
I feel it's very difficult, almost impossible, because this was possible till the time that the polity of India was all in the hands of the Congress party. They ruled the center, they ruled the states. Then came Kerala, where we had a different party. And then we've seen the coalitions and the fracturing of the polity. Now, today, if you try and mesh them together, one is you have any number of constitutional provisions to change, and then how do you implement it? One government, as you know, lasted 13 days. One government lasted 13 months. Does it mean that simultaneous elections are going to mean that we go into fresh elections each time in the assemblies and for parliament? It's impossible. And if you start setting out the changes, then you must make changes in the constitution. Besides, in the states, we have a provision of president's rule. What is the provision at the center? Who's going to rule? Or are we going to elections every 2 or 3 months? So, or as often as it happens. So one of the committees that had been set up by Parliament opined that we could have a sort of changeover every 2.5 years. That's also very difficult. And it means constitutional changes. It means the broadest consultation with political parties before you even venture there. Because what is an election commission? An election commission can call the political parties, but the election commission is merely an umpire at the end of the game. And who are the players? The players are the political parties. Are they going to face elections every few months or every few years? It's going to make the whole game far more expensive, more muscle bound. There are so many ancillary problems. So I would say to that, unambiguously, no.
Right.
That we can't do simultaneous elections.
So one last question by Arish asks the question saying that he's aware of his voting right and value of his vote, but he says, how do we convince especially our family and brethren, friends who aren't willing to cast their vote out of a feeling that their vote will not matter because they say all candidates are bad, corrupt, all of them are same. How to persuade them? What are your closing final thoughts?
It's a struggle really everywhere, not just in India. I've been observer in so many countries, and I see its manifestations in different ways. Even in the more, progressive, if you like, for want of another word, countries in Europe, and certainly in the US. Eventually everything, now that has a presidential system, so you can collect billions of dollars. But the same kind of corruption seeps in everywhere. It's just more sophisticated in other places and less in other places. Don't by any manner of facts think that what I'm saying is that India stands out on that criminal corruption charge. Just study the polity of the other countries. I can mention 2 former presidents in France who were known to take diamonds from Botswana and elsewhere. It all comes in some different form. There are expensive cocktail parties, there are gifts that are given, there are informal lunches and teas and dinners where money is put into a box. No, this winnability criteria enters the bloodstream of a candidate everywhere except a few countries. And that's why I advocate again and again that maybe the day will come when the union will begin to fund political parties transparently on the basis of the number of candidates they have. Either fund the candidate or fund the party, but proportionately to the votes they've garnered in a free and fair election. And until then, we will always be in the dilemma, kisko vote de? This candidate is good, but the party is hopeless, the party is good, the candidate's hopeless, but at least we have nota then. Let's make a beginning. But whatever it is, all of us who are listening this evening, we have to have a thinking vote. And if children in school could have persuaded their parents, who very often had the same attitude, but school children being more entitled in many ways because of their teachers. I know in Delhi schools, got after their parents, no, you've got to vote. Whoever you vote for, but you've got to increase the polling percentage. So an apathetic city like Delhi managed to go well beyond 50% to 60, 65%. And you know that in many parts of the country, say Nagaland, 95% of the people are coming out to vote. In Britain, it's still an apathetic 50%, except Boris Johnson has, stirred up everything. So maybe it'll go to 60. But our voting percentage is still very healthy. And that's a very good thing. So there are some good things too.
Thank you so much, sir, for those wonderful insights. I thank everyone for participating actively in this lecture series. Thank you so much, sir. I convey my sincerest gratitude to you for sparing out your time speaking with us.
No,
we
I
look
do
forward
it any
to more
day
of
of the
such
week,
interactions.
Prerna. But for the 3 persons whose questions I couldn't answer, I'd love to meet them face to face when Omicron is lifted. Where do they all live? I want to know. In which cities do they live?
So Kunal is a colleague.
He is at the law school. Okay.
He's at the law school, and Vandana is my sister. So
great. And the third? The third person who also asked a similar question. I don't know, but if we ever get an opportunity,
either students or colleagues, yes.
Okay, so I would wait for an opportunity when Omicron is lifted and things are safe again, and whether you could kindly invite me at that time, and even in a small group, it would be so nice to sit together.
It would be wonderful. We are looking forward to that, sir. Thank you very much.
And thank you everyone for such good questions. It's really made my day.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Have a wonderful.
Thank you, Sushmita ji, for writing to me. And please, from my side, do thank the Vice Chancellor.
Right. Sure, sir. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.